The session at 5:30 is called Remo, A Life in Words. It will feature Remo Fernandes in conversation with Vasundhara Das. Remo is joining us from Goa, and Vasundhara, as you can see, is in person. I'll give a short introduction to both of them and then hand over the stage to them. Remo Fernandes was born in Goa and grew up there in the 1950s and 60s. He's had a colorful life. He studied architecture in Bombay, busked and hitchhiked his way through Europe and North Africa as a young man, and returned to Goa in his mid-20s, and has had major success with his first home-produced albums, which led to widespread fame and stardom. And now, of course, he needs no introduction. His chart-busting film songs and his albums were landmark hits for a generation of listeners. His innovative musical journey continues to this day. He recently composed and recorded a full-fledged opera on Mother Teresa, and today he's here to talk about his autobiography, Remo, A Life in Words. Remo will be in conversation with Vasundhara Das, who, of course, again, needs no introduction. She's a multi-talented, multifaceted, multilingual actor, singer, musician, composer, songwriter, speaker, entrepreneur, and now recently a music healer, I heard.
Thank you all for being here today. I can just imagine that it must have been such a huge task to really think about one's life and put down in words one's life's experiences. It's by no means simple, because one needs to go back into the past and meet a younger self. And so this book that I have had with me and I have lived with for the past 1 week, because of which I have been ignoring my family because I have been so totally entrenched in reading this life's journey, is nothing short of beautiful. So I would like to welcome its author, Remo Fernandes, fellow musician from India who has taken his music with him wherever he has traveled. Welcome, Remo. It's so nice to have you here today.
Thank you, Vasundhara. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and it's wonderful being with you and meeting you again after years and years and years. I guess we met just once or twice all those years ago, but you are one of the unforgettables.
Thank you.
Forget you. It's great to see you again. And
yes.
Yeah.
Likewise. As I started reading your book, I was quite immediately taken in by the wonderful imagery that you weave with your words and the beautiful nostalgic pictures that you paint of your memories of people and places. You are a multilingual artist, multifaceted artist yourself. You sing and play beautiful music. You draw so well, as the illustrations included in your book show, and you also write beautifully. Has writing always been a part of your life, going back to when you began?
I guess writing has always been one of my pleasures, but and people have commented sometimes once in a while that they enjoyed what I wrote, including on Facebook posts. Now lately it's been Facebook posts, but I've never thought of myself as a writer, although I did like writing. As I mentioned in the book, at one time in my life, I decided that on this planet, in this life, I would earn my living only doing things that I loved doing and nothing else. Nothing, no 9-to-5 job, which I hated, in order to rush home at 5 o'clock in the evening to my hobby, which I loved. That's not a life, doing something you hate all day long and waiting for those last few hours of the day to do something you love. I decided I would only do things I loved. And then I sat down and I made a list of what I loved doing. And this was the list. It was music, number 1, writing, or was it drawing, number 2, and writing, number 3. And music,
drawing was number 2.
Yes. And music 1, and I ended up doing mostly music actually. It's the first time that I published a book, you might say, and Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like you're a journaler, that you kind of have recorded, because the memories are so vivid, and the anecdotes and the mischief and the experiences, they're so vivid that I have a feeling that you would have jotted things down on a daily basis.
No, I did not. I did not. I guess some things remain in your mind, and finally, that's what I wrote about. Whatever remained in my mind. I guess there are lots of things I don't remember, so I guess they were not worth remembering. Perhaps, I don't know.
Wonderful. Early in your book, you talk about how playing, I think you started off playing harmonica and maracas and then proceeded towards ukulele and banjo.
Yes.
And these instruments made you feel free. This is something that I encounter a whole lot in my work these days, how music can make you feel free. And these were so contrary to some of the other experiences that you had, with the institutions and the classes of music, where you were trying to be taught how to read music and things like that. So, you describe it as that almost having extinguished your spark in a way.
Yes.
For a musical person like me, yes, that's totally, I get it immediately. But for someone that isn't from music or hasn't had those kind of experiences, can you elaborate a bit on this concept of freedom and, how something that's so structured can really sort of put a dampener on it?
The freedom I felt, as I've described, is in playing by ear. By just playing on my own, without learning how to read and write music, and learning how to decipher those five notes, those notes which were imprisoned. That's the way I saw them, imprisoned between those five musical lines of solfeggio. Same. And at that time, it was, the whole method of teaching music was very, regimentary. It was so strict. It was not fun. It was not fun. It took away all the fun. And although I did have fun teachers as well, but I don't know, somehow I didn't like it. And luckily, my father, who was the main encouragement in my music, he did not force me to carry on with the studies. And eventually, the Beatles came and blew the world's mind apart without knowing how to read and write music. And everybody realized that even without learning how to read and write music, you could still compose and arrange beautiful music. Just like Shakespeare, I believe, was a failure in grammar school. It's not school
Yes.
that's going to teach anybody to write poetry. It's the heart, it's the soul. The school can teach him language and words, and well, he used words like nobody else could. And I guess it's the same in music. So I just felt free playing by ear, and that's what I carried on doing all my life.
Yes. I have to sort of compare it to my experience, because I studied Hindustani classical music as a child. And in that form of Indian classical music, you're kind of let free, because it's a lot more about what's between the lines. It's all about the improvisation between the lines. And so when I started learning piano, the Western classical piano, my ears were quicker than my eyes. And so I would be able to replicate what was being played before my eyes would get around to reading it. So I totally identify with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all about the soul.
Indian classical music is all improvisation. It's very creative, on the spot. And
Yes.
the only Western music that it could be compared to is jazz, and not
Yeah.
Western classical, like a lot of people try to do. They try to fuse Indian classical and Western classical. They're actually poles apart. Western jazz, yes, it's fully improvisation, and
Improvised.
that's why some group like Shakti with John McLaughlin did so wonderfully in this fusion. Whereas the fusion, between Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin, for example, was, I don't know, there was no life in it. There was two extremes, like I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand your freedom in the Indian classical music, which you found
Yes.
Indian classical music perfectly.
Yeah. Now, when we think about music today, many people, are really wanting their kids to learn music, but the reasons for learning music are very different, for want of a better word. There's always some kind of light at the end of that learning tunnel, which might lead to fame, or, one never knows what the real expectation is. While on the other hand, you have another subset of people that encounter music pretty young, are encouraged to get into music, but then somehow, because of the rigidity of how it's taught, or whatever the case may be, they get shut down or put down. Should there be a different approach to music in general, like say in classrooms, maybe less judgment, more access? I just wanted to hear what you had to say, your thoughts on something like that.
The way I look at it, there are some professions which hold a fascination for the youth, even for parents. Like music has glamour. Being a rock star is glamorous. Being any kind of music star is glamorous, whether you're a conductor of classical music or a singer of classical rags. There's glamour. Being a sportsman has got fame. Whereas being a clerk, for example, is there's no glamour in it. So nobody says, "Yeah, I want to be a bank. I want to be a bank, whatever manager or something." It's not a teenager's dream. Teenagers' dreams can be fueled by this glamour, by fame, by fortune, and sometimes they don't have the talent really. But although they don't have the talent, they tend to be attracted by the glamour, like I'm saying once again. But you'll hardly see a teenager who doesn't have an aptitude for accounts and maths and stuff like that being attracted to to the world of finance, for example. So these are the dangers of the glamorous professions and lines. They attract people for the wrong reasons, and well, sooner or later they find out the hard or the soft way that they made the wrong choice. Yeah, the reason why you're going for something is very, very important. Like I always say, you have to have a passion for your profession. It's got to be something you have to do. It's not just because you chose and how much money is going to get you at the end of the month or at the end of the year. It's something you have inside you, which you have to let out. You can't help it.
Sure, I totally get that.
Yeah.
You speak also about a time when you were coming of age and conversations about your career were taking place in your family, and that the general consensus was that music and the arts are looked upon as hobbies and not as viable career options.
Yes.
In respectable households. But when you look at the scenario today, has that perception changed, do you think, really? And is it really viable to survive as a musician today?
Like I said, if you look at it as a viable profession, nobody really thinks of music, acting. It's got to be done out of passion. It's not only got to be done out of passion. It is usually pursued by people who have a passion for it, not by parents, and not really by parents who say, "Oh, son, you're going to be a musician. Look how much money Michael Jackson has made." Very few people are going to say that. So I don't think that's an attraction really that people go for. And
because sometimes, I get a lot of people come up to me and say, my kid is really good at playing the guitar, or my kid has a really good voice. Can you give any advice? And I find it really hard to give any kind of advice, because when you're looking at a profession in the arts, it's such a subjective journey. And one's expectation out of it is so subjective again, that what advice can one give? So then when I get questions like, do you survive playing music? Do you survive doing what you love? It's a very difficult one to answer. I mean, I need to think of it again from how you're saying in terms of passion. Without passion, would I survive? Without something that makes, my heart move, something that I do that really makes me tick, would I be able to do something like, say, be in finance or be a banker? But then one has to also look at the other aspect of, does it give us a comfortable way to live? And that's something I'm not able to answer for anybody, which is why I thought maybe I should ask you.
Nobody can answer it for somebody else. And like I said, my decision was, see, I had studied architecture, and I know that there would be a huge future for me as an architect. I wrote in the book that my father had bought a big plot in Miramar, and he had subdivided it into, he had bought a big property in Miramar, which he subdivided into plots, built roads and everything, and he had kept the whole thing ready for me to design bungalows on, for the people to whom he sold the plots. So my launch as an architect was all set. And in music, there was no future for the kind of music I was making in India, writing my own original songs in English. When all the rage at that time was Hindi disco, with the rototoms. And that's not at all what I wanted to do. So how much money you earn just isn't a question, it just doesn't come in the way when you have a passion. When you have a passion, you don't, living without much money isn't a struggle. People say, yeah, you worked really hard to get where you are, you struggled a lot. I did not. All I do is played, man. All I did is to play. I didn't work. I never worked in my life. I only played, and I don't mean it. And I don't mean it as a play of words just because music involves playing. That's not what I mean. I don't look at it as work, because I was doing something I loved doing. I had to do it anyway. Anyway, I would have done it, even if I had to work at something else. Like I mentioned earlier, I would have waited for 5 o'clock to finish that office and get back home and do my music as a hobby. Well, instead of that, I'm doing it all day long and getting paid for it. So it's play all the way.
It's the dream. It's the musician's dream, right?
Yeah, it's a dream, and if you follow the dream, I don't mean that everybody who follows a dream is going to make it. That would be so misleading. Anyway, I don't want to get deeper into that and say.
Sure, it's a conversation for another.
There's so much. You've got to be good at what you're doing. You got to believe in what you're doing. You got to have luck. You got to have a lot of things.
Yes.
You have to be. Either you have to be ready to compromise, or you have to be so strong-headed that you don't compromise. And without compromising, if you make it, then it's one thing. And there's so much to it. There's no hard and fast.
It's not a simple question.
Nobody can, chalk out a path and give somebody to make it in music. This is what you got to do. You cannot.
Yes. As I read your book, what struck me again and again was, this amazing honesty and an acceptance with which you regard almost everything. Your relationships with your parents, your reaction to people's expectations of you, your relationships with women, the way you viewed your country, your relationship with music and God and religion. I mean, and you've used music as a socio-political vehicle as part of, the work that you've done over the years, and help people talk about inadequacies in the system as well. And we're currently, when I look at all of those things, honesty, it seems to be really a difficult thing to come by sometimes in life, a true and honest representation of what's what. And when we live in a polarized society, like we're living in pretty much everywhere in the world these days, do you see a possible role for music as something that brings people together, as something that bridges gaps or, lessens the divides? Because everything's divisive.
Well, first things first, the honesty that I put forth in the book is something that I always wanted to do. If at all I was going to write my story, I wanted to be as honest and as merciless with myself as possible. And there are some things which I could not write or dwell upon because although it's my story, there are other people involved in it, right? So I've got to respect. So I had to respect their privacy and also things. So I could not be as honest about everything as I wanted to, but I tried to be. About music, I think, see, I've seen two generations, or a few generations uh, growing up to music. And the music in the 70s, for example, was really, really taken by the youth. And I don't just mean the American and the European youth. Even the youth throughout the world who was following that music, they had songs like Blowing in the Wind translated into French, into Hindi here in India and everywhere, and into their own languages everywhere in the world. And the youth was very much involved in those anti-war songs. And now nobody wants to hear anti-war songs. Nobody wants to hear serious songs. I remember that George Bush banned one or two bands in America who were singing against his war against Iraq and the stuff like that. He banned them from appearing on television and on in record companies were banned from signing them on. And I was thinking, God, when I was in college, these guys were heroes. These guys who dared to write and sing against the system, against the Vietnam War. They were heroes. But then another generation came and they were, called the enemies
Shut
or
down.
terrorists
Yeah.
or anti-nationals or whatever by people like George Bush and others. So music has the power. I mean, if it was again a general rule that music had the power, it would have had that power on every generation, right? But I've seen generations which were influenced by music, and I've seen generations that didn't want to hear serious topics in music. So I don't know what to say. Is there a change in the DNA of those generations, or what's happening? I don't know. Or is it just the general thing? I mean, the youth today is more interested in the latest mobile phone and the latest pair of shoes, the latest pair of Nikes or Adidas, the latest this, the latest that, than a song which has got deeper meaning about things, whether it's ecology or politics or social issues.
When you listen to music today, do you feel like the lyrical content of the music has just generally become something different now?
Yes.
Where you don't, it's not thought provoking, or it's not talking about anything idealistic, or
Exactly. At that time, this music which didn't have meaning was called music. Almost a derogatory word for it. Whereas now, music has become music, and music with meaning and with messages, has become the music for the few, for those.
Sure.
It's the same music, but it's a different generation. That's all.
Yes. And coming to music again, the creative part of making music and the business of music is, there are entirely different worlds. You speak candidly about your encounters with record labels in your book. And like I mentioned earlier when we spoke before we started the session, I was incidentally signed with the label that you were signed with as well. But things no doubt have gone very differently today, nevertheless. What was it like to work on everything? Because you're one of those people that back in the day was doing everything. You were making the music, you were designing your record, artwork, you were writing lyrics, you were, pretty much a one-man show on everything. And that seems to be what record labels want these days. And there's a, totally different way that we have to go now as musicians with streaming. So what was the journey like from, say, creating the music to putting it out to doing everything and then dealing with a record label? Any highs, lows, any?
I guess I love playing with myself. Is all I can say. And right from the beginning, I was attracted to this multi-track, technique of recording because I don't know why really. I mean, having a band and having different people do the different roles like drums and bass and keyboards would have been great too. But I guess I was very much of a loner. Plus, I played all these instruments. So multi-track recording attracted me like crazy. So I could play each and every instrument myself. I learned how to record, how to mix by a trial and error method. There was no school of music, technical
Production,
music.
yeah.
There was, I wish there was, and I still wish I had studied, music recording and music engineering rather than architecture for 5 years or less. But dealing with record companies, I started recording because record companies said no to me. They said, no, your music will not work. You're here. Give us Hindi disco and we'll give you a recording contract immediately. These original songs in English about the telephones in India and about all these issues will not work here. Listen, we are experienced. We know this thing will not work. And I knew that they were wrong, and I didn't care whether they were wrong or right. These are the songs I felt like writing. These are the songs which I had to let out. So I started recording them at home in my studio. I started a little studio at home, and like I described in the book, I took my little yellow scooter which I had at that time, and I distributed those cassettes. They were cassettes only at that time, no CDs yet, to a few shops, choice shops all over Goa, and I was able to let out what I had in me, by doing that. The album became a hit in Goa, and that year, one film producer and one film director picked up that cassette. One was Sham Benegal, who asked me to do the music for Trikal, and one was Gul Anand, who asked me to do the music for Jalwa. And suddenly, because I didn't just stay at home and feel frustrated, oh, record companies are not giving me a contract, how frustrating is that? I did it on my own, and from my own money, because I was singing I was singing weekly, thrice a week in a 5-star hotel in Goa at that time. So whatever money I put aside, I put into this basic recording equipment, and I released that album. And because I released that album fell into the hands of Gul Anand and Sham Benegal. If I had not made that album, these people would have never heard my music. They would have never asked me to do music for those films. And those films opened more avenues, and everything
began to roll.
Yeah, began to roll. There's an old saying, God helps those who help themselves. I always think of that when I think of the fact that I released that first album on my own. If I hadn't helped myself, there's no way that others would have heard it. And
you would have still been playing at Fort Aguada in Goa, maybe.
maybe I would have gone into architecture full time. I don't know. I don't know what I've done.
Well, I have to tell you that, this particular conversation that you had with the record label where they said they didn't want English music, they wanted Hindi music because there was no one to buy it. Years later, when I was in the same office with the same gentleman, Mr. Shashi Gopal, he wanted me to release an English album because I had made these demos in English, and he was like, Vasundhara, why don't you do an English album? And I turned to him and I said, who's going to listen to an English album? I want to do a Hindi. So
everything is done. Yeah. By the way, I must make it clear that my conversations about English and Hindi were not with Shashi Gopal. That was much before I signed with Magna Sound. Much before I signed with CBS. which was my record label before Magna Sound.
Okay.
Those were the first record labels whom I approached, and they said no. And I don't even remember who they were,
Mhm.
but I guess the two or three, that they were in India. There weren't too many in India. And
Sure.
then
Yes.
finally, CBS was the first one who said yes. And R.V. Pandit was the owner and president, CEO, whatever, of CBS. And he had a personal reason for wanting to release my album. He was very much against drugs and the evils of drugs. And my album was called Pack That Smack. It had two
Mhm.
strong songs against drugs. And what else could I ask for except somebody who wanted to release my album because he believed in my lyrics and in my message in the album.
Yes.
So CBS was the
Yeah.
obvious choice when I started. When I finally signed my music out to somebody. R.V. Pandit,
Yeah.
I believe, lives in Bangalore. In case he's watching this, hi, Mr. Pandit, how are you?
Yes, I'm sure he'd
He was
really
into
love to
publishing. He
watch
was
it.
into publishing too, so he just might be watching this.
Well, we hope he does. um, I'm interested in talking a little bit about your band. I know it's you know uh, bittersweet, and of course comes with a lot of weight. But I want to hear about the good times with them. Actually, what was your equation with your band? Um, I've been playing with a band for many years, and I understand how this amoeba, which is music, grows around you and those who you enjoy playing your music with. And it makes you one complex unit, different individuals locking in and playing together. And it's somehow, is good when it's good. Um, and all of it is because of this amazing intangible thing, which is music, right? If you're not a musician, though, it's hard to comprehend that kind of a connection. So that's the kind of thing I want to know about what you shared with the original lineup of the Microwave Papadums.
Uh, there's a difference in a band in which all are equals. All are equals, and they create the music together. They compose the music together. Like, let's say in the Beatles, John and Paul wrote the music mostly. Then George would add his lead guitar, and Ringo would add his rhythms on the drums, and they created the music together. And there's a difference in a band there are so many bands where it's the it's a front man who writes all the music, and even writes the parts for the other musicians. So they play what he has in mind, for that song. So in my case, I'm afraid, or I must say that it was the latter. I wrote the songs, and the most wonderful moments were when they also contributed something. And in the first band, the bassist, uh, Pecan, we used to call him Pecan. Pecan means little one. Uh, he was slim and tall, but he was always, it was his pet name. Uh, Victor Alvarez was his real name. He contributed a lot to all of them. All of them did, actually. Selvin on the keyboards. So, many times the songs are born out of jams. We used to just get together for a rehearsal, and before rehearsing a set song, as soon as the instruments were on, we would start to jam. And on that jam, I would come up with a melody, and sometimes lyrics would take place. So in that jam, many times, everybody was contributing something. For example, "Oh Mary Munni" was a song which came to life because a dholak player came to audition. I needed a dholak player in the band. He came to audition, and he didn't really pass the audition as an all-rounder, but he played a mean kawali beat in my studio, and I recorded that, and I loved it. wow. And I felt like adding a syncopated drum beat to it, and then a very sparse kind of bass line. So things sometimes, one thing leads to another. Although he didn't really contribute in the composing of the song, he just played the Qawwali beat and he went off. And then after that, when I was working on it in the studio, I had the idea. And his name was Munna. His name was Munna. So I said, I don't want to write a song about a boy. So Munni, I'd heard this expression Munni, Munni, and I knew that it meant a little girl. And because Munni meant a little girl, I decided to write a song about a girl who was acting beyond her years. So that whole, and there were incidents which I've described in the book, as you must be knowing,
Yes.
where India was facing a kind of a sexual liberation or revolution in those years, which came too late because by that time there was AIDS, unfortunately. So I decided to write a song to such a girl and to give her a warning about the dangers of sex, and
Mm.
so all these elements brought that song together, and
Yeah.
it's a lovely experience sometimes how a song gets born.
How a piece of music comes to be born. Yes. Um, and of course, you've written in great detail about the unfortunate tragedy, the accident,
Yes.
and how you lost three members of your band.
Four.
Four
Well,
four
three members
members
of
of
the band and the PA and the personal assistant who
Yes.
used to help us with the setup and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's really moving to read what you had to deal with in those days. But that kind of a loss and that kind of having to deal with the things that you dealt with at that time, is there any way of recovering from something like that?
There is no
Have
way of
you?
recovering. I know that years later, when I was writing about it, I went into the same depressed state for a week. I wrote that part when I was in Porto, I remember, in Portugal, and I was depressed for a week. I was a different person for a week. I was back again, the same person who had gone through that nightmare. The biggest part of the nightmare was the accusations from they were not even direct accusations from two of the families, two out of the four families involved, and the loss and everything else together. I mean, I should have been allowed to deal with the loss because that was enough. That was tough enough to deal with. That loss
Yes.
itself was tough enough to deal with, to face. And but
India is a very difficult
on top
country.
of that, I had to deal with all this additional stuff, and it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. It was
Yeah.
really the worst experience in my life. The worst.
And what was going through your heart and your mind when you had this thought, which I don't think is something that's natural that comes to us when someone asks you? And because I know this because I very often travel in a different vehicle, and my band travels in a different vehicle.
Yeah.
Because of logistics.
Yeah.
Sometimes, or whatever. But when someone comes up to you and says, "Why are you alive and why are they not?"
They don't.
It's
They don't have the guts to
just,
ask it as directly. Thus, how's that you were not in the same vehicle?
yeah.
So
So that must have been,
yeah, those kind of things. And like I wrote in the book, I wanted to shout back at them. you know I mean, there's a bank manager sit with the rest of the bank employees in the bank. How could he transact any business if he did that? And your cousin has been playing with me for the last 8 years, 10 years, and you didn't bother to find out how we were traveling all that time. And now that there's been an accident, you're trying to ask me why I was not in that car. And what if my car had had an accident, and if I had died? Would you have asked your cousin and the rest of the band why they were not in my car and why they didn't die with me? It's
yeah.
some people's great need to blame someone when something happens. That's the only way that I can explain it. Some
Yeah.
people feel that need. they have to blame someone. They have to find somebody to blame. But anyway, for me, it was like shattering. I was already shattered by the loss and all this stuff together. It was shattering. I'm surprised that I escaped almost unscathed and unscratched. Well, it took time. It took time to come out of it, but I did.
It must have taken you a few years before you could write again, did it? Or were
No,
you
not really. Not
was
really.
writing your solace? Was it the other way?
Yeah, not really. Writing has been my savior, in fact. And the first the first thing I did when I finally felt like going back to the studio, well, not felt like I felt like going back to the studio, but music used to hurt me. Can you imagine? The thing that I loved most used to be painful because music used to remind me of my bandmates.
Yeah.
So it's like it was always my solace. Whenever I had any problem in life, I could just go to the studio and start working on music, and I would forget the problem. But here, I couldn't. I couldn't take solace in my one.
In the one thing that gave you solace.
Exactly, I
Yes.
could not. Because that was the thing which also reminded me of the pain
Yes.
and a physical pain. I never knew that the sadness and stuff like that
Loss.
could actually, hurt you physically. But I used to feel a pain in my chest, in my stomach, and I could not play music. And finally, I forced myself when I came back from Europe, and I forced myself to go to the studio. The first two pieces of music that came out of me were dedicated to my band, and that was like a purge of what happened. It was painful, but through that pain, I had to play, I had to compose, I had to write, I had to sing, and that was a purge.
Yeah.
Finally, it came out. I was able to let it out. So music was my savior once again.
In the end, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me take you back down to those places, those dark
I
places.
took myself back by writing about it.
Again, yeah. Having traversed through life this far, mostly driven and dictated by music, your entire journey, and also to a very large extent dictated by your joy, because music is obviously one of your joys. Do you have any words of wisdom to other musicians who seek joy in the art that they practice, or the art that they, or just even artists, or just even humans,
My
how
words
do you
of
find
wisdom,
joy?
my words of wisdom are always the same, and they've been the same for years now. And that is, find your own voice, find your own style in music. Doing cover versions is a great school of music. I also started off copying my favorite artists, the Beatles, the Shadows, and that's a great school. From the Shadows, I learned to play lead. From the Beatles, I learned to sing, and so many things you learn. But then the Beatles, I don't know whether it was because the Beatles were composing their own music, because artists at that time, didn't really write their own songs. People like Cliff Richard, had somebody else write all his hits and then he would sing them. Elvis had somebody else compose for him and then he would sing those songs. And the Beatles certainly turned the world on its ear because they were writing their own songs, they were arranging their own songs. And it isn't just that which enabled me to write. I guess I had this writing bug in me. I can say that they awakened it, or they helped to awaken that bug. And when I was 14, I felt like sitting with my guitar and writing my first song, which of course is very much Beatles influenced at that age, and it was the 60s. And so, what was the question? I'm sorry, but yeah, my
Any
words of
words of
advice.
wisdom?
Yeah, my words of advice. My words of advice are, do cover versions by all means, but remember that that's not the end, the beginning and the end of your musical journey. Not everybody can be a composer. I realize that. But at least after a while, try and do a cover version your way, you know. And if you want a hint to make it easy for you, if it's a rock and roll song, try and do it in a reggae style. If it's a reggae style, if it's a reggae song you want to sing, you love very much, then try and play it, in a Latin way with a, Latin rhythm, Latin feel. And who knows, by doing that, maybe one day, your own song may come out. You know, your own,
Your own voice.
your own composition may be awakened. Your own, your own voice as a composer may be awakened. If it isn't, it's all right. It's all right. Everybody doesn't have to be a composer, but at least
Yes.
don't think that copying a song exactly like it is on the record is the ultimate. I mean, at the most, you're a Xerox machine. Then, some Xerox machines are better than the others, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, yes. I also identify very much with what you're saying, and the
And
the
I would like
highlight.
to, and if you don't mind, I would like to add a word of advice to our audiences in India. Stop glorifying, cover artists. I mean, they are great, but they're cover artists. So if you keep encouraging that and say, my daughter sings this song just like Madonna, and that band played that song just like Dire Straits, and if you go into raptures about that, then you're encouraging people to be copycats. You're not encouraging originality. So a lot of it depends on the audience too.
So a lot of what I'm hearing you say is go out to Indian audiences is to go out and support and buy music by writers and creators of original content, right, Remo?
Not if you don't like it. Not if you don't like it. You don't have to buy it as charity.
Okay, let
Don't
me
buy
add
it
that
as
in there.
charity. Please don't buy it as
Go buy
charity.
music of
Yeah,
people
buy
that you
music
like.
which is good original music, and that will also encourage record companies to release music, original music by artists who are good, instead of just ignoring it and saying only this sells, only this genre sells.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that they wanted to open the floor to questions from the audience.
Okay.
Hi Vasundhara, hi Remo. A big
Hi.
pleasure to have both of y'all in conversation. I'm Tony Francis. I'm an author
Hi,
myself, but
Tony.
let me just tell you, Remo, you're part of my formative years for sure.
Thank
From
you.
Dekho Dekho, Ye Hai Jalwa, Pepsi Open Up, there was Hamma Hamma. But
Yeah.
this is a vanity question. The reason is that I remember I was in class 3 when we were all taken to the AIR studio to sing a
You were in
song.
class 3, so that means you were around 8 years old.
Perhaps class 3 or
Okay.
class 4. Yeah, class 3, I think. And
Okay.
we were taken to the AIR studio and we were made to sing a song for the Bhopal gas tragedy. And when
Uh-huh.
I see you here, there is this vague memory of someone telling me that you were associated very strongly. Either there was a concert that you were part of, or something in that line. We must have perhaps sang a song that you sang at the studios. I do not know. What is your recollection of that, of your performance, or a song that you must have perhaps sang?
I have a very, very warm recollections of that day, because I was not supposed to sing at that concert because I had a show in Calcutta. But that show in Calcutta was held one day earlier or something. There was a change in dates. And on the next day, I was in Bombay on my way back to Goa. So I went to this concert as part of the audience. And somehow the organizers spotted me in in that huge Brabun stadium. And they asked me, will you sing a song on the spot? They borrowed a guitar from one of the other artists, put it in my hands. And without planning, I went up on stage and I sang 2 songs. I think it was Graham Bell, and I think I sang Pack That Smack, because I wasn't, I had not written any song about the Bhopal tragedy because I was not supposed to perform there, right? So as I announced on the stage, I said, I'm not singing a song about a gas which killed people, but I'm singing a song about something else which is killing our youth, and that is smack and heroin. And I sang Pack That Smack, which I just written. And the audience response, I still remember, was phenomenal. It still warms. I could not sleep the whole night. I went back to where I was staying, and the whole night that those two, that performance and the people's reaction was playing back and back again and again and again in my mind. And then some weeks later, Doordarshan was the one and only television channel in India, right? And at that time, it was absolute monopoly. And they decided to play the whole concert, which was like 4 hours long. So they played it over 4 consecutive Sundays. Sunday afternoons was the prime time because everybody was at home. And they played, I think, 1 hour of the concert on each Sunday, different artists. And somebody in Doordarshan decided that on each of those Sundays, they were going to play the other artist as well as my songs. So me singing those songs, I don't know whether they played both on each Sunday or one on one Sunday and then the other on the second Sunday and the first one again on the third Sunday. I don't know, but I was on those programs each and every Sunday. And that was one of the things that happened that year, which helped to catapult me into the national scenario, into the national limelight, because television exposure was something phenomenal, is something phenomenal. Well, today with multiple channels and local channels in every state, television is a battle. But when there's one television channel in the whole country, that's exposure that nobody can match. And so my memories about performing at that concert encompass all of this, being pushed on stage at the very last minute, having a phenomenal response, and then that performance being played on 4 consecutive Sundays. It was wonderful. It was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Remo. And I
Thank
think
you.
Calcutta also deserves a round of applause. Calcutta as a city. Thank you, Remo.
Oh yes, Calcutta is the city. It's a city of real music lovers and art lovers.
Good evening, Mr. Remo Fernandes. It was wonderful listening to you. I had actually 2 questions, quick ones.
Hi.
What role does Goa play in your music?
Goa plays an all-important role in everything I do, not just in my music, because it's my birthplace. I was born here, I grew up here. So a place where you're born and you spend the first years of your life until your school life, and to which you keep returning even after you grow up. And I was studying architecture in Bombay because there was no architecture college in Goa at that time. So I had to go to Bombay for my college studies. But every long weekend I would run back to Goa. So Goa is very much a part of my life, and it will always stay with me, even if that Goa does not really exist anymore, as I've said in a few songs. The old Goa that I grew up in and with is always with me, and nobody can take it away.
What was your experience like working in Bollywood, especially with legendary composer A.R. Rahman?
Working in Bollywood, was a very different experience, with different music directors, with with different film directors, and working with people who are truly talented and who don't need to make up the lack of talent with other things like bravado and show and flashy clothes. People like Rahman, he's one of them. Sham Benegal was one of them. It's been a wonderful experience, because there you're meeting one on one as a human being, and not as some put on, like some put on person. Most of the music directors who were lifting and copying and stealing songs from the West, they are the ones with the biggest. They were the ones with the biggest bravado and the biggest noise. But the real artist does not need bravado or noise. His work speaks for him. And Rahman was one of those. And so was Sham Benegal. And a few in Bollywood were really a great pleasure and honor to work with.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You too.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a short question. I remember hearing you perform Graham Bell in Bangalore many, many moons ago. And it's kind of stuck in my head, almost like a limerick, you know, like a nonsense verse in a way. And I've often thought of that song. I wondered what was the inspiration for it, apart from the phones of Bombay. You know, was there
Which one
anything
was
more
it?
to it? Graham Bell?
Oh, Graham Bell.
Yes.
Oh, the inspiration for Graham Bell was, of course, the way the phones worked in Goa, or rather didn't work in Goa. I had come back after 2.5 years of hitchhiking around and living in Europe. And I came back to Goa and I decided to live in our ancestral house in a village called Siulim. I had grown up in Panjim, in the capital of Goa, and I decided to shift to the village because the ancestral house was empty and my father had bought it off the rest of the family. And there were no telephones in Siulim. So one had to drive all the way to Mapsa, which was about 10 kilometers, the nearest city that was 10 kilometers away. If I wanted to make a call to Panjim, okay, which was 20 kilometers away, I had to drive to Mapsa, book a call, wait there for an hour, and after 1 hour, the trunk call wouldn't come through. It would have taken me half an hour to go all the way to Panjim and come back. So anyway, it's the state of telephones in Goa which made me write that song, in plain and simple. Unfortunately, the telephones have been improved hell of a lot, so my song doesn't make sense anymore.
Well,
I'm joking.
now we feel life has come to an end if we lose a cell phone, and you know, life went on in those days. We managed.
Yes,
fine.
life went on. We met whoever we wanted to meet whether it was on a crowded beach, at a crowded fair, without cell phones, through radar. That's it. We met our friends. We did everything without cell phones. Now, if a message doesn't go, for 20 seconds, we feel as if the world is coming to an end. And the cell
Thank you
phones,
so
by the
much.
way, the cell phones work fine, but there is no signal in this place where I live, for example. I have to run out with my cell phone. If somebody calls on the cell phone, I have to run out to the garden, to the one end of the garden, either in the front or at the back. And so I'm obliged to have Wi-Fi in the house, and Wi-Fi luckily works fine when electricity is working. If electricity goes out, the Wi-Fi goes up too. So not much has changed finally, but things have changed. Yes.
Thank you.
And thank you for your memories.
I have to say, Remo, this has been such a pleasure to meet,
Pleasure's been all mine. All mine.
to meet you, and I really look forward to the day when we'll meet in person and we'll talk and play and do what
Yes,
we
I
love.
look forward to that very, very much, very, very much. I
Me
just
too.
hope and pray that this pandemic will end. We've been hoping and praying and thinking that it would end long ago, but just when we think it's finally going off, yet another variant comes out.
Yes.
But I guess everybody is a bit hopeful now because Omicron has been declared or unofficially declared not to be so strong, and that is supposed to be a sure sign that the pandemic is losing its power and its force. Anyway, I don't want to hold forth about the pandemic. I don't know much about it. But
Yes. So we look forward to a day when we can all be free of our masks and
exactly.
we can come back into life the way we enjoyed it and we knew it and find new joy. So with that, thank you so much.